Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be going over another one of the Moonbeast game skills, and this one is Spinebreaker. Spinebreaker is an evocation skill, and it's actually quite interesting. It seems to be sort of a combination of skills. Like if I were to compare it to Diablo II skills, for instance, I would say that it is Bone Spear plus Plague Javelin. Yeah. Bone Spear plus Plague Javelin. I would put it in that category. Now, Bone Spear is magic damage, and this is blunt damage. Blunt damage is interesting. It also has a shadow damage component to additional targets. So it does a blunt initial hit, and then it does a shadow damage hit as well. It also has a tendency to pierce, so it doesn't necessarily just hit that target. As you can clearly see, it does tend to pierce through the target and go through to the other side, which is, you know, for a blunt skill, I guess that's interesting. I also noticed a tendency for it to kind of shoot downward, though, which does mean that it ends up being hitting the ground. So we'll see about that. But as you can clearly see, it travels for quite some distance, all the way to the edge of the screen, as long as, of course, it doesn't hit anything. And most of the time it does, because it tends to hit the ground. But still a very epic skill, as you can clearly see here. It also has enhanced terrain damage, which is actually something specific to Spinebreaker. It specifically says piercing missile that does enhanced damage to terrain. And when you look at it, I mean, yes, it does enhance the damage to terrain. It breaks dirt, it breaks walls, it breaks all sorts of things, and it also breaks faces. It's exceedingly good at breaking faces. And, you know, for good reason, because it is an ability that does face break. But evocation skills are more than just face breakers. They also have other specific effects on them. We're going to go over some of the option points that you can potentially do with this, and we're going to talk about what you can potentially build it for. So first off, it is a cast skill, which means it is affected by increased cast speed. It is evocation. Now, evocation is a very specific effect. We'll talk about that in just a second. Piercing is obviously so that it pierces through targets, and it is also a ranged ability. As you can clearly see, it has two different damage types. It has blunt and shadow, and it is not affected by your weapon. So your weapon damage does not affect a spell, and that is because, well, you know, weapons are not for spells, unlike in Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, for some reason where they decided to make all spells enhanced by your weapon damage, which is really stupid. This game is actually following true to the Diablo 2 method, which is your spells are not enhanced by your weapons. Now, you can add tons of things onto this ability. The first one that we'll talk about is Umbra. Umbra is a trail of shadow that lasts for 3 seconds. And as you beef it up, it goes from 3 to 6, and then 6 to 9. This trail of shadow is actually surprisingly effective at dealing with monsters because it does a pretty massive amount of damage, kind of like the Plague Javelin does. If they are standing in the shadow trail, they take considerable amounts of damage for standing in the shadow trail. Let me see if I can not hit this monster directly in the face, but see if I can put the shadow trail directly near him, or on top of him at the very least. A little difficult to do without immediately killing the target, but let's see if we can try. There we go. And as you can see, the poor little bogey feral is headbanging like crazy because the shadow trail is dealing out massive damage. And not only does the shadow trail deal massive damage, but it also lasts for a particularly long period of time. As you can see with our current upgrades, we're currently at 9 seconds. You can also stack multiple shadow trails on top of each other, making the thickest, darkest black coal smoke I've ever seen. And anything that steps foot within this aura is just absolutely just destroyed. And it's a very interesting way that you could potentially build this, and it goes into the shadow side of things, because obviously this is shadow damage, and the ability itself also does a little bit of shadow damage, so building things like shadow penetration would be very effective here. Moving on from the Umbra, we also have access to Adept. Adept reduces the mana cost of the ability, which is actually really good because it does seem to cost kind of a lot at 10 mana per cast, and you kind of want to cast it a lot because well, monsters need their face smashed in. So beefing this up can beef it up from 15% mana cost reduction, 30%, and then eventually a 45% mana cost reduction, which is actually really good for making it spammable, so you can get off more shots in a fight, and obviously put down more Umbra auras, or rather, shadow trails. This one is pretty self-explanatory. It doesn't really need much, like, you know, it's the term I'm looking for, like spread detail on it. Honestly, this game is a little bit difficult when it comes to mana consumption, and you are going to be sometimes completely out of mana. So having this is definitely useful, but at the same time, you only have a limited number of option points to spend, and so like whether or not you want to max this one out or even put a couple points into it is going to be up to essentially other options. Moving on to the next option, we have the Shadow Glyph. The Shadow Glyph is it's a 30% chance to gain a Shadow Glyph on kill. Now, the Shadow Glyph is specifically used with evocation skills, and technically this is an evocation skill. So there are 2 evocation skills on the list. One is Glyph Lunge, and the other one is Spinebreaker. Glyph Lunge is a charge attack, very similar to Charge in Diablo II, that allows you to gather 3 glyphs and fire them off as an evocation. This one also can do similar things through that, but it also has the ability to generate specifically shadow glyphs, which are actually generally just going to give you back mana. You can either put multiple points in this, so if you wanted to grab multiple points, you can have it set up where it's almost an 80% chance for you to get a shadow glyph on kill. And when you see this, it's pretty apparent what is happening here, so let's murder a monster real quick, because why not? And you're going to see the glyphs appear in the bottom left-hand corner here, and I'll show you what they look like. Of course, we've got an elite level 9 Gazer. That's 1 level from a max level monster. Let's see if he gives us a glyph. And we did. So as you can see, we currently have a shadow glyph down here. Now, if you collect 3 of these glyphs, you get access to a evocation spell, essentially. And these monsters are a pain in the butt for me to kill right now. Elites, elites, elites. My poor little low-level Spinebreaker spell, which is only level 5 right now, could be level 7, which is currently the cap, isn't quite up to snuff on handling it versus these thicker boys. You know what? Let's take a quick teleport over to some of the lower level zones. All right. Let's still cancel a couple little teleports. No big deal. Alright, and so now we have access to some little baby monsters that we can murderize. Alright, so I did actually get a random glyph there, but as you can see, I also got an explosion. That explosion is because once you gain 3 glyphs, you get access to the glyph spell, essentially. And I'm going to go ahead and get another glyph spell, since we wasted the other one. And we've got 2, and let's grab 1 more. So now we have mana, mana, mana. That's shadow glyph, shadow glyph, shadow glyph. And upon attacking with that, we're going to be able to get that explosion. That's the evocation part of the evocation skills, is that they utilize these special glyphs to gain access to special spells. Now, you don't necessarily have to use Shadow Glyph. You can get random ones through Glyph Lunge. Glyph Lunge can also spend them. You can also get random ones through killing cursed monsters through the Shadow Walk skill. You can also get blood ones, which make monsters bleed through the Blood Lash ability, and through the Bone Storm ability, you could potentially get bone glyphs. So there's a lot of ways that you could potentially build those glyphs to make the Spinebreaker work properly. And then last but not least is, of course, the stunning ability, so you can beef up the ability for it to stun. And let's go ahead and rank that up to maximum, shall we? Let's see how far we can push it. Alright, decided to get my points back real quick so we can test it. So it's got 40% chance to stun for 2 seconds. The next upgrade is 45%, the next upgrade is 50%, the next upgrade is 55%, and the last upgrade is a 60% chance to stun. That's actually a pretty hefty, and for 6 seconds at that. So a 60% chance to stun for 6 seconds. To use this, I think we're going to have to go back to some of those tougher monsters over here, because the baby monsters won't even live long enough to be stunned. There we go. There we go, and he is stunned. Might be some sort of stun resistance, perhaps. Definitely applying stun pretty regularly, although not quite for 6 seconds, it seems. I would assume that probably has something to do with blunt resistance, because blunt seems to be tied into stunning. And so if the monster has blunt resistance, it might affect that? I don't know. Seems like an awful lot of points to spend on something that isn't necessarily active for the full 6 seconds. But then again, you know, nothing is. I think in Diablo II especially, like, pretty much nothing actually lasts for the actual duration that it states, right? There's always some sort of resistance or some sort of penalty or various other things. And so you kind of have to just be aware of that. If you were spamming that on a regular basis, though, I would imagine that the stun would be fairly effective and would pretty much stay active for the majority of the time. Oh, poor guy. Speaking of this ability's specialities, one thing that it is exceedingly good at is digging. It is a very good digging tool, and I know I went over that at the beginning, but I mean, if you actually sit here and just dig down deep, you can literally dig all the way to the bottom of the world. And you want to know how I know? Because I've done it. I dug all the way down to the bottom of the world. I dug a giant pit over here with the assistance of 2 abilities, Spinebreaker and Shadow Walk. Both of them have their own specific specialities, and I dug a giant pit into the abyss. Yes. So yes, when I say that the Spinebreaker ability is exceedingly good at digging, you can trust me on that. It is exceedingly good at digging. Overall, I definitely really enjoy the Spinebreaker ability. Not only does it have, you know, pretty much the same punch and power as a Bone Spear, and not only does it pierce, but it does very good damage to surrounding targets with a like shadow explosion. It has the Umbra ability that you can add in even more surrounding damage, which does a significant amount of damage to anything walking through it, and it is very easy to fire this and kite the monsters through the Umbra, which is extremely effective. On top of this, you can utilize the decrease in mana to fire off as many of these as you can, getting the mana cost down, I think, almost as much as 45%, which is really good considering I think it's like a 10 mana ability, which brings it down to something like 5.5 mana or something per cast. You can use it to build glyphs, you can use it for stunning, and of course you can also combine it together with any of your glyph building abilities for the evocations to make specific evocations that you might want to use. Although I do think that Glyph Lunge is the better evocation ability. It also could be utilized alongside Spinebreaker, because it does also generate random glyphs as you're attacking. So if you utilize Glyph Lunge and Spinebreaker together, you could of course have, you know, random glyphs being made with Glyph Lunge, and then once you obtain all 3, you could fire them off at a distance from safety with Spinebreaker. I think that's pretty much it with this particular ability. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals joining me. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you enjoy the content. And as always, keep watching.